Today's daf is daf Kuf Yud Dalid, and we're going to look at the last line on Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Beis, and basically we're going to start on Kuf Yud Dalid, which is today's daf. And the parak that we're learning opens with a Mishnah, and the Mishnah divides into two categories as far as the prohibition of shechting a korban that was disqualified, chutz, outside of the Mikdash. And in dividing up into two categories, if you just very quickly turn back to the beginning of the perek, you will see that Paras Chatas and Sorah Mishtalech are not brought at all in the Mikdash, and therefore, if he offers them or outside the Mikdash, then the Mishnah operates. Oh, the Mishnah invokes the pasuk Vel Pesach Oel Moed Lo Hevio, which means that it's got to be Roy Lovol Pesach Oel Moed. However, in the second category of different kinds of psuli korbanos, the Mishnah, to our surprise, quotes the end of that pasuk as a separate yalfusa of Lifnei Mishkan Hashem, Kol She'eino Roy Lovol Lifnei Mishkan Hashem. So the Gemara wants to know the following. In those cases in the second category, Arovea, Vanirva, etc., why do we need a second pasuk? Vahanami, typically, we could derive the exclusion from the prohibition of chutz from the same pasuk which we invoked in the Reisha of the Mishnah with regard to Paras, Chatos, and Sorah Mishtalech, namely Pesach Oel Moed. It's got to be Roy Lovell of Pesach Oel Moed. So the entire list of four categories of disqualified korbanos that are exempt from chutz could have been derived from that very same pasuk. Why did the Mishnah find it necessary to stretch its arm out to a second pasuk when the first pasuk would have been sufficient? So the Gemara says here on Kuf Yud Daled, Bishleim Rovea v'Nirva, of the four cases of disqualified korbanos, I can justify in two out of the four why the pasuk El Pesach Ol Moed would not have been sufficient. And those are the cases of Rovea v'Nirva. Either the animal was sodomized by a man or the animal sodomized a man. In those two psulim, I can give you a case, a scenario in which El Pesach Ol Moed would not be an exclusion, would not be a valid miyut. Why? Mishkachasla Dr. Shinu Meikara v'Hoda Ravo. He was magdish his animal; it's his own private possession, and he set it up as hegdish. At that moment in time, it was Roy Lovo Pesach Ol Moed. Later on, there was an act of erva, of an immorality that generated a psul and invalidated the animal as a karma. So, since at one point in time it was Roy Lovo Pesach Ol Moed, therefore it should be included in the chiyuv of chutz, and cannot be excluded by virtue of the pasuk, which is the beginning of the pasuk in Vayikra Yitzayin of El Pesach Oel Moed. El Muktzah v'Nevad. Now we have two other cases which are disqualified korbanos because of avodah zarah. One is Muktzah, where he designated the animal for avodah zarah, and the other is Nevad, where he actually worshipped the animal. In those cases, we cannot come up with a possibility of it being Roy Lovol Pesach Ol Moed, which we'll explain exactly why in a second, and therefore we don't understand why the Mishnah had to invoke the second pasuk, Al Mishkan Hashem, to exclude the chiyuv of chutz. Now, why in these two cases of invalid karbonos? Is it impossible to set up a scenario where at one moment in time it was roy lovol pesach moed? It's because if it's muktzah or nevad, then he cannot be magdashit. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I skipped a step. We want to say that he was magdashit before it became possible, and we successfully achieved that goal in the case of nirva, because he was magdashit before it came possible. But you can't have a hakdasha before muktzah nevad and then have a muktzah v'nevad. Meaning, if he was magdash the animal, then the psul of muktzah v'nevad could not get off the ground. It could not be generated. Why? Because we have a principle called ein adam oser davar she'ein shalom. Once you are magdash it now belongs to hegdesh, and once it belongs to hegdesh, it's out of your private possession, and therefore you could not possibly designate it for avodah zarah. You can only designate something for avodah zarah if it's yours, but if it belongs to hegdesh, then your designation of the animal as a nevad, as muktzah avodah zarah, would generate an iser of avodah zarah on an animal that's not yours, that belongs to hegdesh. You cannot generate an iser on something that belongs to someone else. So, for example, you have an animal, and Ploni Almoni comes along and he worships the animal. He cannot generate a shem iser of avodah zarah on your animal, because ein adam oser davar she'ein shalom. So our goal, which was to get a hakadasha before the psul, could not be achieved because the psul would never get off the ground once you were magdash it, because once you magdash it belongs to hegdesh, you can't make it into a nevad. So the Gemara answers that there is a possibility of being magdish the animal and nevertheless generate a psul of muktzah v'nevad without upsetting the principle of ein adam oser davar she'ein shalom, and that's kodshim kalim aliv the Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Why? Because in kodshim kalim, Rabbi Yossi Aglili insists that it's mamon hejot, that even though you were magdish it and it has kedushas karmon and kedushas guf, but nevertheless it still belongs to you. And the reason for that is because kodshim kalim nechal bailim. So there's kind of like a shutfis, a partnership between HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because you are magdish it for the mizbeach, and the individual owner, because he's going to eat the basar of kodshim kalim. And in the context of that shutfis, of that partnership, Rabbi Yossi Aglili defines it as mamon hejot, or otherwise known as mamon bailim. Desanya, we learned in the Brisa, Umala Mal Bashem. So we're talking about a case where Ruvain demands of Shimon that he return some monies. Shimon went ahead and he took a false oath to the effect that he doesn't owe Ruvain any money, and then we found out that he really does. And in such a case, he has to, number one, he has to pay an additional fifth, which is called the Kem V'chomish. Then he has to bring a korban me'ilah for the violation of a shvua sheker. And the Brisa says, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the Rabbos kodshim kalim shehi mamono, that even if he took a false oath on kodshim, but it was kodshim kalim, then Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that that would be mechayev him Keren Chomesh and Me'ilah. Why? Because it's his privately owned kodshim. So therefore, in the light of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, we can now imagine a case where a person was magdish an animal for kodshim kalim, let's say, for example, a shlomim, and then he worshipped the animal. He generates a psul of nevad. Why? It's not a violation of the principle of ein adam oser davar she'ein shalom, because it is his animal, even though he was magdish it. And that's Rabbi Yossi Aglili's unique sheet, as we described before, because of that partnership between the owner of the animal who's Magdish it and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it's going to be brought on the Mizbeh. Hilkoch. Now the Gemara sort of just reiterates the answer based on Rabbi Yossi Aglili, how to understand why in these four cases, if we accept Rabbi Yossi Aglili, we can have a situation where he was Magdashit and it was royal level of Pesach Olamod, and then it became possible. Rovea v'nirva dvar erva, right? Rovea v'nirva became disqualified after he was Magdashit, and Mukta v'nevad, and Avodas Kocha b'kodshim kalim, and we're going according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So that even in the case of Avodah Zarah, of Muksa or Nevad, you can still imagine that the psul was chal after he was magdish. So at time T1 he was magdish. It was royal level of Pesach al Moed, and you cannot apply the exclusion of El Pesach al Moed in the rate as it does in the ratio of Parschatos and Sari Mishnaleach. And nevertheless, even though he was magdishit, since he was magdashit for Kodshim Kalim, and Rabbi Yosef Aglili holds its mom in Bailam, therefore he can now make it Nevad, and he's not upsetting the rule of Eino the most Dover Shalom, because it's a Dover Shu Shalom. Now we have other cases in the Mishnah which are exempt and excluded from the Chiyuv Chutz because they're disqualified Karbanos, but not because of El Pesach Ol Moed, but because of the second pasuk of Lifnei Mishkan Hashem. And those are Esnan, Umechir, and Kilayim and Yotzei Dofen. So we discussed this on Sunday, and that is Esnan is money, in this case, an animal that was offered in payment for an illegitimate action with a harlot. Mechir Kelev means that you bought a dog with this animal in an exchange, a barter exchange. Kilayim means it was a mixed breeded animal from two breeds together, and two species together, and therefore it's possible mizbeach. And Yotzei Dofen, you cannot bring a carbon to the mizbeach if the animal was a cesarean birth and it didn't come out naturally in a natural birth. Oh. So how do we come up with cases where the hegdesh came before the psul? In the case of Esnan Umechir Kelev, okay, he was Magdashit. Even that's problematic, because if he was Magdashit, how did he offer it as payment for this or for that? He can't do it. He was Magdashit. You can't pay up a harlot or pay for a dog that you're buying with Hegdish. And number two, Kilayim and Yotzei Dofen are cases where from the moment of their birth, they're excluded from the Mizbeach, the Psulei Karban. So how could you imagine that there was a moment in which it was royal level of Pesach, the Kedusha was Chal? And the Gemara answers, Bevlados Kodshim. We're talking about a case where he was Magdish the mother animal. And Kasavar, Vladi Kodshim Bavayosan Heim Kedoshim. There's a machlokes Tanoim about the Vlad of Hegdesh. So again, he was Magdish, he consecrated the mother. What's the moment, the critical moment of time in which the Vlad also takes on the status of its mother and its Hegdesh? Is it from the moment of conception or the moment of birth? And the word Bavayoso means when it came into the world, i.e. from the moment of its birth. Okay, so now we're talking about Vlad Kodshim. And we're going according to the Mandiyamu who holds Vlad Kochim Bavayosan and Kedoshim. So therefore, he could be Magdish, the mother animal, while the baby is in a fetal stage, because it doesn't gain the status of Kochim until it's born. So therefore, it's not a case where from the moment it came into the world, it was already possible, which would mean it's excluded under the first pasuk of if it's ain't a roy level of Pesach. No, it was roy. Why? Because in the fetal stage, he was magdishit, and its status as kodshim only emerges after its birth. Let me just double check that I got that right. Oh, the disqualifications took effect while the offspring were in a fetal stage. So it means that for the act with the harlot, he gave her a vlad. Now, don't ask me about the Maknid Shalom Oliola, because I guess he sold the mother with the fetus. So again, it's possible now that the owner transferred ownership of the offspring to the harlot while it was in a fetus. In this case, the offspring was fit to be brought as an offering before intended as payment. For the if the owner would have wished to sacrifice. All right, now we're getting into another sugya over here called Uba Yerech Imo. But just to make life, because we don't really have to go to too many different sugyas here at this point, what we have to know is that he could be Magdish the mother. The fetus is part of the body. It's like a limb of the mother's body. And therefore, if he were to sacrifice the mother, he would sacrifice the fetus as well, the mother animal with its fetus inside. And that means that in the fetal stage, it was already roy level of mizbeach, and then it becomes possible when it is b'haviyasan, when it emerges from its mother's womb as a separate entity, an independent entity, and at that point, it's a korban it's a behemoth that's psula, because he had already offered the fetus in the fetal stage as payment, etc., and it was born through a cesarean birth. And what case did I leave out? Oh, or it was born kilayim, but that psul of kilayim is only going to be chal when it emerges from the mother's body, and the hegdesh and royal mizbech was already chal while it was still earlier in the fetal stage. Okay, now the Mishnah records a machlokas, which is going to occupy our minds for the rest of the daf, between the Chachamim and Reb Shimon about an animal that, although currently it is disqualified from the Mizbeach, but with the passage of time, it will become fitting for the Mizbeach. Rabbi Shimon is going to argue that in such a case, you will be chayav for chutz. The Rabbanan are going to say, well, right now it's not royal Pesach Ol Moed. You can't bring it as a korban. I don't care about the future. And Reb Shimon is going to say no. So, for example, let's say you have a case of a mum ha'over. So with the passage of time, the blemish is going to go away, it'll be healed. Or, for example, we have a case of a tar, which is a turtle dove, and it's too young right now to be brought on the Mizbeach. And we have a third case of Oso Vespino, which means that if you shechted the mother today, then for the balance of the day, you cannot shecht the baby, the vlad of that mother. And therefore, although tomorrow you could shecht it, now today it's not royal mizbech, and that's the machlokas Rab Hodan and Reb Shimon. So the Gemara now wants to know, why did the Mishnah bother with three different cases? So Gemara says, Utzricha, we need all three cases. The ton of Ali Mumin. Okay, there's a sensitive cheshbon here. it's kind of a mathematical assumption where something is just like the opposite. So let's hope we get it right. Okay. So the Itana Bali Mumin. Okay. The Rabbanan are of the opinion that even in the case of Balmum Over, since it's not Roy now, it's therefore excluded from Roy level of Pesach from the violation of Chutz. The logic of the Gemara now is that there are different gradations of psulim. You can have psul low profile, and you can have a real solid, profound psul, and then you can have the worst psul in the world. So here's the inverted mathematics. The more the more profound the psul is, which means its exclusion from the Mizbeach is so basic, the more I'm tempted to think that, just one second, sorry. The more I'm tempted to understand the Rabbanan's ruling that it's not royal mizbeach, and therefore it's exempt from chutz, from the chiv chutz. So therefore, if I only had bali mumim, there's meisi. It's a very basic disqualification. It's most to the mizbeach to bring an animal on the mizbeach, which is so blemished, and that's where the Rabbanan would say that it's Eino Roy Mizbeach, and therefore it's pot. Avol Torim. Okay, it's premature in the sense that they're too young, but Lo Meisi, I mean, there's nothing repulsive about the turtle birds. Is aim, I might think, to Module Reb Shimon. In this lowercase kind of disqualification, maybe the Rabbanan would concede to Rabbi Shimon that, you know what, you have two factors here. Number one, it's no mos, and number two, tomorrow it'll be mature enough and it'll be royal mizbeach, and therefore let's call it royal mizbeach. And Rabbi Shimon is right; he's going to be chayav for chutz. Let's go the other way around. The Torin. There's a reason to assume that Torin is even more of a profound psul. It's antithetical to the Mizbeach in a more profound way than even a Balmum. Why? Mishum de lo chazi ve'idchu. Okay, let's see if we can get this down. Right. An animal is born normal, and if it gets a blemish after a certain period of time, then at least at one moment in time it was royal mizbeach. But in the case of Torim, it was never royal mizbeach, and therefore it's a much more profound exclusion in which maybe the Rabbanan would be moded to Reb Shimon that in such a profound disqualification, which is called in the Gemara's language lo chazu ve'idchu, then the Rabbanan disagree with Reb Shimon and they hold that there's no chiyuv chutz because it's not at all royal mizbeach. Aval bali mumin, at least at one time the animal was healthy before it developed a blemish. The ichzu ve'idchu. So there was a point in time which was ichzu, means it was royal mizbeach, and then it was rejected because it became a bal mumin. Nebuch ate it ate a thumbnail. Is there a model lahu Reb Shimon? Rabbi Shimon Rabbanon. One second. Just one second. I'm sorry. I have to admit the truth here. This is not exactly what I said. One second. Um, I'm sorry. So I was saying the other way around. That if if it was never Roy to begin with, like we're waiting for the Torah to mature, so Reb Shimon is saying, since it was never rejected, it has a closer relationship to the Mizbeach, and it's almost Roy, and therefore Yechai for Chutz. But Reb Shimon might be Modeh, concede to the Rabbanan that in the case where it was Roy and then it was rejected, that's called Chazi v'nidchu, because the animal before it developed this blemish was royal mizbech, and now the Torah is saying, get out of here. So there's like a new chalos psul. You can't say that about Torah. It was never in the parsha of korbanos, so there was never a chalos psul in a positive way. The tarti. If we had both bali muma over and Torim, and once again now we're going to go back to the Rabbanon. And we're going to say Mishum de Psula Begufayu. The Rabbanan see this as a very profound exclusion from the Mizbeach because the guf of the animal in and of itself is excluded and disqualified from the Mizbeach. But also Vespino, maybe it's really royal Mizbeach because the only problem is in the Shechita of the mother, which is called Psulmi Almakos, Eber Modele Rabbanu Reb Shimon. Maybe in this case, the Rabbanu would be moded because it's not really fully excluded from the Mizbeach. It's just a temporary kind of thing because you shechted the mother. Is Tricha, therefore I need all three cases. Let's go on. Shohaya Reb Shimon Omer. Right, Reb Shimon has this concept that since in the future it will be royal Mizbeach, therefore there's no exclusion. My time of the Reb Shimon, where did Reb Shimon get this from? Rabbi Eloi, Rabbi Yoch, or Meish Lakish, the Omar Kra. So this is a pasuk in Devarim, Perek Yud Beis, and we'll read the pasuk L'Sasim Kechol Asher Nachnu Osim Po Hayom Ish Kol Yosher B'Einom. Okay, so now we're getting into the whole sugya of Heter Bamos, and Moshe Rabbeinu says to the people of Israel that there are Yudalit Shonim of kibush v'chil, of conquering the land when Yoshua crossed the Yarden, and another 7 years of chiluk until they divvied up the land amongst the people. Now, during this period of time, the Mishkan was in Gilgal, and after this period of time, the Mishkan is going to get set up in Shiloh, and Moshe Rabbeinu is telling them that during those 14 years, while the Mishkan is in Gilgal, and there is a Heter Bamos, because Gilgal is not like Shiloh. Shiloh has the status of a Migdash Mishkan, but not Gilgal. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, Amalu Moshe Rabbeinu Yisrael, Ki alisu le'aretz. Yeshares, Ki alisu le'aretz means during this 14 period of time, 14 years. Yesharos is voluntary, takrivu. So you're allowed to bring a korban nidava, but chovos lo takriva. Korban chova you're not allowed to bring until Shiloh, until the Mishkan was established, the Mikdash was established in Shiloh. Oh, so now this Isur of bringing a carbon chova, an obligatory chova during the 14 years of Heter Bamos of Gilgal, is Gilgal agabe Shiloh Mechusas Man. Basically, what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying is that this carbon that you want to bring today as a carbon chova is Mechusas Man. It's not ready for it. We have to wait until Shiloh comes around. V'ka Amar Lahu Moshe. Now we go back to the pasuk again, and the pasuk reads Lo Tasun. Lo Tasun is a lashon of Allah. And therefore, if Shimon is going to say, in this case of Mechusar Zman, you get Malchus for bringing the carbon. Oh, so now, based on this whole analysis, we should come to the conclusion that according to Reb Shimon's derivation, if during a period of Heter Bomos, he brings a carbon Yachid, I'm sorry, if he brings a carbon Chova, then he violates the Yisrael Otasun Kain, and therefore he should get Malchus, Fekti Gemara, Amar Yirmiyel Reb Zera, Ihachi, Milky Nami Lucky, Lilki.